Going into 2024, Fermin Aldeguer was the outright favourite to win the Moto2 World Championship. After ending the previous year in incredible form, everyone expected him to just completely storm the competition and win the championship by about 100 points. That's not really what's happened in the end. With 4 rounds of the championship left, Fermin Aldeguer currently sits 7th in the World Championship, 78 points behind Aldeguer in first, and he would need a genuine miracle to win the World Championship. So where did it all go wrong? Why has Fermin Aldeguer seemingly disappointed everyone this season? And will he be a success going into MotoGP next year? Let's take a look, shall we? Like I said, he ended 2023 in incredible form. In the final 6 races of 2023, he scored 6 podiums, including winning the last 4 races of the season, and he finished 3rd in the World Championship. Along with a win in Silverstone earlier in the year, things were looking good for Aldeguer, and he was heavily linked with a move to MotoGP for this season. In the end that didn't quite materialise, but this year everyone thought he'd just annihilate the competition. So going into the opening round in Qatar, Aldeguer managed to finish in a lofty 16th place.
Easy top 3. If I'm not... 16th!
And this was all while his teammate Alonso Lopez went on to win the race. Not the greatest start to the season, but after this weekend it was announced that Aldeguer would be racing for Ducati in MotoGP in 2025. And at the time it was being reported that he'd be given a factory bike. In hindsight, it's safe to say that maybe the contract talks were distracting Aldeguer a bit for this weekend, and that could explain his poor race. So with a MotoGP contract in his back pocket now, it was up to Aldeguer to perform in the rest of the year and in the next race in Portimao and prove why he got that contract and prove he deserves to be in MotoGP. In Portimao he goes to finish 4th, but this doesn't quite tell the full story, as he was given a double long lap penalty for jumping to start. He probably had the pace to win this race, but in the end a jump start is a mistake that can happen to everyone, and he did quite well to recover to 4th in the end. In USA he goes on to finish 3rd, and then in Jerez he managed to absolutely dominate the race from start to finish, winning by a comfortable margin, and this was the point where everybody thought now we would see him in his unstoppable form that we saw at the end of last year and he'd just clean out the championship. But no, the next race in France he finishes 7th and seemed to really struggle in the latter stages of the race. Then came Catalonia. Aldeguer led this race from early on and he seemed on course to win, until he got a long lap penalty for track limits. And then while doing the long lap penalty, he crashed out. He was under a lot of pressure from Aldeguer and the pressure seemingly just got to him and he made a really silly mistake. And while he may not have won this race, this was a guaranteed podium thrown away by him. Then a week later in Mugello, Aldeguer went and qualified in 18th place, and then while trying to recover some positions, he crashed out after 3 laps. And by this point Aldeguer was already 59 points behind championship leader Garcia after 7 races. However, after Mugello we had a month-long break before the next race in Assen, and this seemingly helped Aldeguer because in Assen he looked on fire. He was leading the race again for a while, but just like in Catalonia, he gets a penalty for track limits. This time manages to actually complete the penalty and stay on the bike, and he ends up finishing 2nd, just behind Agura. However, this was another race victory thrown away in my opinion, because if he didn't have that penalty he would have won this race quite comfortably. Then the next weekend in Sachsenring, Aldeguer actually won quite comfortably in the end. Just like in Jerez, Aldeguer looked very comfortable in this, he looked back to his best and he looked ready to fight for this championship going into the summer break. And with the way this championship was unfolding, there was no real standouts, so if Aldeguer could kick on and win a few races in a row, he could easily win this championship. And going into the summer break full of confidence after 2 very solid weekends, surely Aldeguer would show the form he showed at the end of last year and blitz the rest of the championship. At the very next race in Silverstone he qualifies in 11th and finishes in 12th. This was particularly concerning because this was the place he won his first race last year. And to be honest, he was quite lucky to finish in 12th really, because so many people crashed out of this race. He just seemed really off the pace all weekend. He had to go through Q1. This was a concern. Maybe he can do slightly better in Austria. No, he qualifies in 17th and finishes in 20th. Alright, well, how about Aragon? Well, he managed to get a good start in this race and he was fighting within the lead pack for a while, and a podium was very much on the cards. This was until he pulled off an absolutely ridiculous move on Denis Onju, and he suffered a massive high side, crashes out in a very dramatic style. He had to go to the medical centre to make sure he didn't get injured. Thankfully he was okay. But with Aguirre and Garcia both being injured for this race, this was a huge opportunity which Aldeguer had to claw some points back in the championship, and he completely blew it. And it was up until this moment where I was under the belief that Aldeguer would still win this championship. But after this crash in Aragon, I no longer believe that. In Misano, things improve a bit. He finishes 6th in the first race and then 5th in the second race. They weren't the worst results, but they didn't help his title hopes at all. But any hopes of him winning the title were fading fast. But now we're heading into the Southeast Asian part of the season, where Aldeguer absolutely dominated the end of last year. So how did he go in Indonesia? Well, this race was a bit of a train wreck for Aldeguer. He made numerous little mistakes, but he ended up finishing 4th, just behind the podium spots, but if he didn't make numerous mistakes, I think he could have got 2nd here. There weren't any big mistakes in this race, just a load of small mistakes which cost him a lot of time in the end. And as has been the story of his season so far really, needless mistakes have cost him. And at the most recent race in Motegi, this was just pot of luck really, this race. He ended up finishing 12th, in a bit of a chaotic wet to dry race really. But at the same time, he did qualify in 15th place, but still not a good look. And like I said at the start, Fermin Aldeguer currently sits 78 points behind first placed Aguirre in the championship. It would take an absolute miracle for him to win the championship now. To say it's been an underwhelming season for Aldeguer would be a complete understatement. At one point there was a genuine conversation over whether Ducati should cancel his contract for next year. Now, that was a genuine discussion which was going around the paddock. Of course we now know if that isn't happening, he'll be racing for the Gresini team next year. But reports were, when he signed his contract, were that he'd be given a factory bike. That's not happening anymore, he will be on the GP24 next year. It's been a very patchy season with a lot of rookie errors, some underwhelming pace at times. However, there's been a few sprinkles of complete class, like in Jerez in Germany where he won comfortably. But why has this happened? Why has he struggled so much this season? Some people will point to the fact that Moto2 switched to Pirelli tyres this year, but I don't buy that, and mainly because Aldeguer started this season in pretty good form. If we ignore Qatar, for the most part he was very solid in the first half of the season before the summer break. And that's the strangest part. He was pretty good for the first half of the year, and if he kept up the form and just eradicated his mistakes, I still think he would have won the championship. But the second half of the year, his pace has been shocking. He's only really been in podium contention in 2 races in the second half of the season, and he was nowhere near in contention of winning either races. It's strange how he can go from being at the front so often in the first half of the year to being very much a mid-table rider for the second half of the season. I do think that in Moto2 this year the competition has just got better as the year has gone on. Since the summer break, the likes of Aaron Canet, Celestino Vietti, Jake Dixon, Tony Arbolino, they've all improved and they're now fighting at the front a lot more consistently than they were at the start of the year. Because for the first half of the year, there were only really 4 people fighting at the front, which were Aldeguer, Joe Roberts, Garcia and Aguirre. No one else was really consistently up there. But now we have about 8 people fighting at the front at nearly every weekend. And we're now seeing some of the rookies from this year start to break through and become a lot better, like Onchu and Moreira. They've been fighting at the front more often. Like, the competition has just got better as the year has gone on. But that can't be it. That can't explain why Aldeguer dropped off so much after the summer break. Could there perhaps be a bit of complacency or a bit of cautiousness around Aldeguer if he's trying not to get injured before his MotoGP season next year? Again, I kind of doubt that. If he is taking it a bit easy in order to not get injured, that's the sort of thing you'd only see in like the very last race of the season. Aldeguer was still within a shout of a title going into the second half of the year. I doubt he's taking it cautiously. I think this season has taught us a lot about Aldeguer as a rider, and I think we are seeing now that he is very much a confidence rider. Right, while editing this video I realised that I made a complete hash of explaining this, so I'm going to try again, okay? Basically, in my head there are 2 types of MotoGP riders. Type 1 is a rider who relies a lot on confidence and good form in order to perform consistently in races. And Type 2 is able to just grind out a good result no matter what, no matter the conditions. If they're having a good weekend, they're able to perform consistently. Type 1 is where you see people like Maverick Vinales, Marco Bezzecchi, and it's where Fermin Aldeguer is at currently. While Type 2 is where you see people like Marc Marquez, Bagnaia, Quartararo, Jorge Martin. All the best riders are in Type 2. However, most riders start off in Type 1 where they need the confidence in order to perform. And the difference between the best riders and those who don't quite make it are the ones who are able to make the jump from Type 1 to Type 2. And I've noticed that usually a rider makes a step between the two when they lose a championship battle. So for example, Quartararo, Bagnaia, Jorge Martin have all lost world championships which they should have won, and they've since become much better and more consistent because of it. Of course there are just some exceptions to this rule, like Marc Marquez, Pedro Acosta, David Alonso. They just seem to be born in Type 2. They never had to go through Type 1. Basically what I'm trying to say is Aldeguer needs to take the failures he's had this season as a learning curve and go from Type 1 to Type 2 and become more consistent and become better at grinding out a good result even on a bad weekend. I think the best thing for Aldeguer is just for this season to end as soon as possible and he can jump onto the MotoGP machine and get used to it. For his sake, hopefully he can grind out at least 1 or 2 good results, get a podium or maybe even a win in the remaining 4 races of the season. Take some confidence going into next year, and I think he could do really well. And speaking of next year, it will be a very interesting year for Aldeguer. He will be on the same bike as Franco Morbidelli and Alex Marquez. In the grand scheme of things, 2 very average riders. If he gets battered by both of those 2 riders, then it'd be safe to say he just isn't up to the standard of MotoGP. But if he is able to stay close to them in the championship and have a few standout results, then it will be clear that he is capable of performing in MotoGP. Aldeguer has shown across his Moto2 career that he is an extremely talented rider. He's shown that at times this season, he showed that at the end of last year. Like, he has not become a horrendous rider overnight just because he's had a few bad races. We can't forget the fact that he's got 7 wins in Moto2, 11 podiums and 7 pole positions. He has achieved a lot more in Moto2 than a fair amount of the current MotoGP grid. He has earned his seat in MotoGP for next year. And I think what this season has shown us is that Aldeguer definitely has the talent to fight for championships in MotoGP, but he has some things to work on if he actually wants to win any world titles. For me, Aldeguer still has a very bright future ahead of him. I'm convinced that he will be a success going into MotoGP next year. I just think he's going through a bit of a bad run of form at the moment, and I think for him, he needs this season to end. Get on that MotoGP bike, and then I think he'll flourish over time. I don't think he'll be an instant success in MotoGP. I don't think he'll be on the levels of Pedro Acosta. But if he can get the odd result, like a podium or a pole position, it'll be a successful season. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Why has Aldeguer struggled this season? And will he be a success in MotoGP next year? Let me know in the comments section below. And while you're there, make sure to leave a like on the video, and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys very soon. Bye bye.